Well, hello, readers. Trisha Goyer here, and I am here with Cheryl Grey Bostrom. Talking about her new book, which is so amazing. I can't wait to talk more about it. But before that, Cheryl, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a Pacific Northwest nature novelist writing contemporary women's fiction. But I've lived in the Pacific Northwest my whole life and a fifth generation Washingtonian. And I love studying how the natural world intersects and illustrates the nature of our hearts. And
Hmm.
as the Lord instructs us through His first book of the created world, we can learn an awful lot about Him and His nearness to us. And so I started writing fiction. I'm kind of late to the game. I started writing fiction in my 50s, and it's been an experience of play for me. And I've written these books, Sugarbirds, Leaning on Air, and What the River Keeps, as gifts to my grandkids. And then hopefully they'll
Oh,
bless others as well. So, yeah, so that's been fun. And we
I was
live,
going to ask.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
no,
We live out in a rural county in Washington State, and I'm an avid photographer, nature photographer. So I'm always roaming this country, and I write about the land that I love. So
yes, and then you could tell that you're from that area. So I grew up in Northern California, but it was like just South Oregon, like an hour from the Oregon border. So very similar, the Northwest with the mountains and the rivers and very rural area. There's like 3,000 people in our town. And then we lived in Montana for 15 years. I'm in Arkansas now, which is complete culture shock, but I
oh yeah.
love the Northwest. I have an uncle in Paulsbo, and just so many beautiful things. So tell us, you talked about you came to it late in the game. I would love to hear just how that journey came to. Did you wake up one day and say, "I just want to write a novel," or how did that happen?
I've always loved words. I start, I, From the time I was a 5-year-old, I wrote poetry, and I still have some of those. I wouldn't want them to see the light of day, but they're pretty darling. And I can remember telling my grandmother when I was 10 that I wanted to write a novel someday. But for the next many decades, I wrote a couple of nonfiction books. I wrote a column for Women of Faith back in their conference days and other columns. And I taught high school English for a number of years and helped other people with their books. But I think the power of story and the way that I felt about fiction writing, I just held it in such awe that I think I considered myself ineligible to write fiction, almost as though it had to be something that was bestowed on you to write to
Yeah.
write fiction, as if it were mostly something you were born with, I guess. And so I was in my 50s and my late 50s, and my first granddaughter was born, and I just had this deep compulsion to write a story for her. And I think as you get older, you do get more playful. And I wanted to step outside the boundaries of the sorts of writing that I had done before. And the longer you live, the more story you have, right? And I've walked through some big roads of healing myself and breaking of generational patterns. And as the Lord has brought me into new places through his processes of healing and sanctification, he he's given me a lot of good material. So
Yes.
so I think our stories need to cook. And while none of my books are autobiographical by any stretch of the imagination, they do carry elements of my heart and of what I've learned about life and what God has taught me through his word, and the ways that those can be shown through characters and hopefully give life and hope to readers is just my heart's desire. So anyway, I think that can be done at this time in my life for me right now, as I believe I'm hearing God call me, through the power of fiction, through the power of story.
Yeah, and the stories are so there's so much depth to them. There's so much mystery. I don't even know how to explain. Like it's very a very slow unfolding of trying to figure out like what's going on? What's this pain? What's going on? Yeah. So let's back up and tell a little bit about the story. What the river keeps. And so Hildy is the main character. And then we just see that she's very fragile. I mean, that's the only way to describe her. She's such a fragile, but immediately you care for her. You want to know what has gone on in her life. There's things in the past. I'm halfway through the book. I don't fully understand. Like it's like this gentle unfolding. You're getting glimpses of, oh, maybe something happened here. But what I love is you just see that this hurt person, and God brings people into her life, which she doesn't even want people in her life at all. Just give her the fish and she's good, to bring that out. And then we have other broken people in the book. It's just so beautiful. It's just so beautifully written. Her story unfolds so beautifully. There's this mystery that's not like a mystery like a whodunit mystery, but this figuring out who she is and what's going on with her was just, I'm really, really enjoying it. So tell us where you got the idea, and then tell us a little bit, just the premise of the story.
Okay. Well, I was raised on the Olympic Peninsula about 7 miles from where this story takes place. And I hiked the Elwha River with my grandparents and had always loved that land. And this river is 85% in Olympic National Park.
Mm.
And in the early 1900s, the river was trapped by a dam 5 miles from its mouth. And I go into that in the afterword, and there are elements of the story where you learn this river's history. But when that happened, this magnificent ecosystem was cut off, and these salmon runs that were sometimes up to 1 million fish a year were severed. And by the time Hildy returns to her home, her childhood home in the Elwha River, these dams are going to come down, and she has been hired as a lead fisheries biologist. But my premise, my question that I asked when I considered this setting was, what would the story of this river have to say about the human heart? And
Mhm.
what if there was a breaking in a person of all that's healthy in her by a lie that's told, just like a lie was told to this river figuratively, and the natives who lived there literally. So what happens, and how does healing take place? And so the river story and the tribe that lives on this river and Hildy all have these dovetailing stories of generational strongholds and the lies that are told that tell us that we are something different than who God created us to be. And then as the healing unfolds, it's to me, I can still read the ending of this book, and I know I wrote it, but I can read the ending of this book and cry every time, because our God is a healer, and healing is built into the natural world, and it's built into us. And uh, and just watching that unfold is pretty spectacular, because she is a she's a brilliant scientist, and yet she
Mhm.
thinks that she's losing her mind, and
Yeah.
it's just her beliefs about herself are so flawed. And so yeah, that's the gist of it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's what pulled me in. Because at first, because it's from her point of view, you think, oh yeah, she must have early onset dementia, or it's like something's going on with her.
Hmm.
Which then, as you're going along, like she's brilliant. Like she doesn't even see herself, and I love books that have the unreliable narrator,
Hmm.
where her interaction with other people actually gives you a better glimpse of who she is than kind of her thoughts about herself. So that's super fascinating that as you go, you're like, oh, she's not like she thinks she is.
Well, and she doesn't trust her memories, which is why she's
Yeah.
become so reclusive. She's been told some things, and readers will pick up pretty early on who they think the perpetrator
Mhm.
is. But
Mhm.
it is a psychological mystery, and you won't guess
Yes.
the what or the why or the how until you get to the end. I haven't had anybody guess it yet. They know who it is, but they don't know what happened.
Yeah.
But to reinforce her memory, where she thinks her memories are wrong, she collects things. And the book was originally titled River Hoarder, but my
Mhm.
publisher Tyndale believed, and rightfully so, that there are connotations with hoarding that really don't represent this book truly. But she just thinks she has to keep these mementos and then review her memories all the time to keep them straight. And so
Yeah.
she's very isolated. She just lives with her canary.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And okay, tell us about Luke. And he comes in. I'm trying to think, like a quarter through the way, maybe Luke comes in. And suddenly, you're like, "Ooh, who is this?" But he's also has so much pain in his heart that he's carrying around. And I just love that you see her healing, but also you see him healing. And again, I'm halfway through, so I cannot wait to see this unfold. I'm sure I will cry at the end. But tell us just a little bit about him. That his story is tied in with this book too.
Yes. So Luke is a carpenter who shows up on the resort where Hildy grew up and where she's now living as she works the Elwha. But he's experienced a tremendous tragedy in his own life that leveled him. And like he tells her early on, he said, "I'm all in, Hildy, not with some, you know, namby-pamby God who gives me favors, but with a tsunami God who raises the dead." Because he has experienced a tragedy that has leveled him and
Mhm.
transformed him. But because of that, previously he's kind of this all that guy who's running a specialty niche fishery for high end restaurateurs, and he's been living the life, and God has broken him and brought him to a new place so that when he looks at Hildy, he's able to see her as a bruised reed. He knows there's something going on in her, but God has given him this patience and the wherewithal to stay the course with her. As a man, he's frustrated at times, but he's so deeply loving, and you know that that's not from himself. And there's a place in the story where both Luke, where another character, June, says about Luke and his sister, who's also experienced a betrayal.
Yeah.
If you've been through what they've been through and come out wanting to see mourning, you've been carried. and
Mm,
and Luke knows that too, but Hildy questions everything, and it takes a long time for Luke to build and develop trust with her. um, I hope the story, I'm hearing from readers that the story, when I say a long time, or we say we have to wait for this patiently, that it's compelling because you're so curious about this
yeah.
unfolding, and you're with the river. And I hope it just the readers can just sink into it and see something of themselves too, because we're all broken and we're all healing from something. And when we can recognize the process, what a joy is that, and see that in other people too. It grows compassion in us. So
Yeah, and I love how you mentioned this also, it's reflected in nature. So we see these internal boarding up of feelings, and then there's this dam on the river, and you see the struggles of the salmon spawning, and then you see the struggles of interaction. I mean, it's such a reflection, but it's not like in a way that, oh, it's just beautiful. I don't know how to explain it. It's just beautifully done, where it all, you see the unfolding of nature and you see the unfolding of these relationships, and it's kind of written in a lyrical way. Not that it's a rhymey book, I don't know how to explain it, but it's so beautifully done. And I would just love to hear kind of your writing process, because I don't know, for me it seems like this is an author that can just sit down and all these beautiful phrasing just flow out naturally, and she never struggles with writing.
well, we know that things are not always what they seem, right?
Yeah.
I always pick setting first,
Hmm.
and and then I start writing. And so once I pick the setting, and I'm a photographer, so I spend a
Hmm.
lot of time studying the creative world and asking God what he would teach me through that. But when I sit down in the morning, I get up very early. I'm usually at my desk by about 5:30 or 6, and um, and give myself over to the author of ideas, and
Yeah.
and know that there's nothing that I'm going to write that has any meaning unless it comes from him. And lots of times I have to sit and wait. But I always start with a word count. I mean, I lay out, if let's say I have a 90,000 word book that I'm going to write, I lay it out on a paper calendar, and that's always subject to revision. But I sit at that desk and get up so that I don't break my body with sciatica or whatever,
Yeah.
take walks and pet my dog and do all of that. But I stay the course until I hit that word count. And
Mhm.
I'm a rolling editor. And I think because I started with poetry and that's my first love, I want to write prose that is very, very vivid and concrete without being purple. You know, the concept of
Ex
purple, where you're just trying to write flowery stuff to try to make it sound beautiful. I really don't want to do that, but I want my words to be carefully chosen so that they can plant this beautiful imagery, because I'm taking people into deep, sometimes dark places of the heart, and unless we're carried and buoyed by redemption and hope, we can't stay the course in that kind of darkness, because we get lost. I will carry my readers, even as I have to carry my own heart as I write it, uh, into places of light. So there's a lot of imagery of light, and even in the dark spots. And in this story, so in my process, this, you might find this interesting. This story makes it very clear that there's a spiritual battle going on, and that the unseen world is very involved, both in the natural world and in these characters. And Hildy has the capability, as she returns, although she considers it a curse, but as she returns to this valley, to discern dark spirits.
Mm.
And she believes it's part of why she's crazy. But Luke, who's been through his own period of darkness, and others in the story say, just because you can recognize the unseen doesn't mean you're crazy. It could be a
Yeah.
gift. And when I first started writing this story, one of the what one character calls lie makers or hellmongers, and they're demons, they're dark spirits.
Right.
I wrote a character into this story, not in a Frank Peretti sort of way, but I
Right.
wrote it in. But I wrote it in because the enemy prowls the earth looking for whom he can devour. And to the extent that we're bolstered by the Spirit of God, we are guarded, and greater is he who's in us than he who's in the world. And so uh, I just want to keep that in front of readers as I write, that we have greater help than we can ever imagine, but also we can't be blind to the fact that there's this battle going on for our hearts and for our souls. So I wrote this character. I wrote this character in and named it, and it was a character that dogged Hildy. And as I wrote the story, because my characters will take on lives of their own and will tell me where they're
Yeah.
going and what they're doing,
Yeah.
this character this character tried to carry the story and tried to sideline it and break out of the rails that I had laid for the narrative, and move Hildy into these places that I was unsettled in my dreams. I was, it was difficult during the day. And finally, last August, as I'm working with my editor, it just kept ramming me into these dead ends that were not the intent of the story. And I went back and rewrote the entire thing, took that character out as a named character, and still simply had the presence of these shadows in the story. So you know that there is an influence or an attempted influence going on, but cut that character off at his knees with a lot of prayer and a lot of searching, because it was hard.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me that even in these stories we tell, there's power in the
Yeah.
narrative, and it's coming from a source that's either holy or unholy. And we need to
Mm.
pay attention to that as writers and as readers, to what we're reading and what we're listening to. So anyway, I like how it turned out, but it took a significant revision just to banish that individual character and to say, no, you do not have a voice in this story. We
Wow.
recognize your presence, but you don't have a voice.
That is fascinating. That is fascinating. And that's so amazing. Like, so obviously you didn't just sit down and it all flowed because it seems like
No.
it, which is a credit to your editor and yourself of going through, because I would never know that a whole character has been cut out of this book. But I love how you say that there's so much light even in dark places, because I mean, I just lost my grandma 3 weeks ago, and when I first started, I'm like, I don't know if I can handle this book, but at least I want to try. And and I was just fascinated. So right away, it was like just fascinated, pulled me along. And but when it got to Luke's tragedy, which we won't go into right now, but I'm like, I don't think I can listen anymore. I turned it off. And it was probably 15 minutes later. I'm like, I need to find out what happens. I turned it back. I'm listening to audiobook. I turned it back on, and so even the hard stuff, there is so much light, and there's so much hopeful, and you can tell that there's healing happening. That I'm like, okay, it just pulled me back in again. So that lasted 15 minutes of me putting away the book.
Well, it's good to hear you say that, you know, but because I do think that when we face our darkness cloaked in the Holy Spirit and the truth and the power of the word, when we can move into it and then move out through on the other side, our faith grows, our resilience grows, everything grows, you know. And I know that was true in my own life in my 30s, you know, because I was trapped in a generational stronghold of
Mm,
that I did an awful lot of work with a pastoral counseling in my 30s, and yet I wouldn't have done that had it not been for a friend who was courageous enough to let me walk with her into hearing her own story. And it was, I don't know if there are degrees of darkness. Darkness is darkness. It was different.
mm,
It was different than mine, but the work that she did and the courage that the Holy Spirit gave her to go through that, I thought, if she can do it, I can do it. If she
mm,
can heal, I mean, it just gave me huge hope. So these stories of healing and hope and restoration, even when you think something is unforgivable. And when you get to the end of this story, there is stuff that's unforgivable in it, humanly
mm.
speaking. And then you see the magnificence of freedom that comes through truth and forgiveness. So I hope that's the effect that it has on readers.
Oh, so good. And I love that this is the legacy, going because you went through that healing. This is the legacy that you have to pass on to your grandchildren.
Mhm.
It's hope, it's healing. It's a different story than it would be if you would have just stayed trapped in that.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
so good. It's so good that you're writing these stories, but I think also, even though they're gifts for your grandchildren, other people are gonna find hope in them too. Because it is so hard when things hurt us, whether they're intentional, unintentional, or just life in general is hard. It's very difficult,
Yeah.
that we just want to close ourselves off. Um,
Mhm.
but there's so much healing that God can provide. And like in the story, he does it through other people, and he does it through relationships with him and with others. Closing ourselves off never brings any answers or hope to us. So yeah, and I love it. It's just such a beautiful way to tell. It reminds me of a lot of Francine Rivers books.
Mm.
There's a lot of
Thank
the healing that comes. Yeah, so
That means a lot to me. Thanks.
yeah. Okay, so What the River Keeps, and you mentioned you have two other novels that are out there. Are you working on something now? Is there something in the future that we can look forward to?
Sure. Yeah. The first book was Sugarbirds, and that was set here in the county where I live. And it's a coming of age piece about a little girl who lights a fire and gets lost not only in a physical wilderness or hides in a physical wilderness, but gets lost in this wilderness of shame and guilt and then
Mhm.
comes out of that. And the second story is Leaning on Air. And that's, people are saying that that's like a cross between A Beautiful Mind and The Notebook, if you've seen those two.
Oh, very cool.
And so this next story is a dual timeline, and it's set in the San Juan Islands, which are about 10 miles from where we are right now. And it begins in fox farms in Alaska. And so there's this overarching theme. Again, it's another nature novel, but there's a story of of a young woman who escapes a difficult situation in her family with a pair of foxes and finds her way to this homestead in the San Juan Islands in the 1800s. And it's very layered, and her growth is tied to a young man that she meets. So it's a love story again without being a romance, and it's an historical piece without being straight historical fiction. So,
Yeah.
whatever. But then in 20 in the 20 at this point it begins at 20 in 2023. It's a story of a girl who has talked to her great grandmother and who was close to her great grandmother about this early narrative that takes place in the early
Mm,
1900s. And then she goes on a journey back to find this island and these foxes, and along the way has a number of life-changing experiences. So these threads are all coming together, and I just love it when they all connect.
and
And
when you
it
have those moments when you're like, "Oh, it does tie together."
works. It works. Yeah. So it's the stories. I had a couple of false starts on it because I started it too early, and generationally it just didn't work out. And but this one's working, and it's on a roll now. So hope
Oh, good.
yeah.
When are you expecting that one to be
I don't
out?
know.
Next
Yeah.
year? Oh, okay, we're not even
No.
gonna go there.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. Okay, so something you said is curious. It's a love story, but not a romance. And I've never heard it phrased that way again before. I would love to hear more of your thoughts about that.
Well, I guess I think genre romance. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, my novel Leaning on Air is a love story between a married couple where
Right.
the relationship breaks through tragedy and then they come back together. Um, it's not. I guess they aren't tropey, but
Yeah.
if you're somebody who loves uh, a, a the development of a love story
Mm-hmm.
with all its layers and the sorts of intimacy that are difficult to achieve and also uh, holy and we're physical, emotional, and spiritual beings.
Yes.
So these are love stories that incorporate all of those elements. I guess that
So
would
good.
be.
And yeah, I think yeah, like romance it says so there's it says, on the back cover, this is a romance. You know, the boy meets girl like in the first chapter. Like it's just that's
Mhm.
kind of the pattern for a romance. And that's why I mentioned like Luke, it took a while for because I was just like, oh wait, there's another person. Oh, we're having another point of view. It wasn't in the first chapter. But I was
Uh-huh.
okay. Like I got enough time with Hildy. I'm like, okay, we could introduce someone else now. So but and you could see this relationship developing, but it wasn't like your typical boy meets girl first page. You're going to find out both about both of them in the first chapter or two. So yeah, I like that. I just loved the way you said that. I'm like, oh, I've never thought about that before. So
Oh.
good.
Well, they have to. I guess it was very important to me that my readers were invested in Hildy and developed a
Mhm.
compassion for her because she's pretty strange. I mean, at first
Mhm.
glance, you're going to think this girl's very eccentric, and we can be busy and we can say, well, she's an odd duck or whatever without really questioning what has happened in her heart. And so I needed characters. I mean, I need readers to love her before she meets Luke so that they can be rooting for her. Even
Mhm.
as we even and maybe to challenge all of us when we have that first impression of somebody just to dig a little bit and ask ourselves, why are they like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So good. Oh, okay. I'm loving this book. Okay, again, you can
Thank
hold it up
you.
and the cover is just beautiful. What the River Keeps. Definitely you need to go get this. And now I'm like, okay, now I need to go find her other books that are already out because I want to listen to those next. I mostly listen to audiobooks. So I'm like
Mhm.
doing laundry or cooking or cleaning,
Yes.
and but then it's really good, which I'm in the car and I'm also turning it on, and I'm like, but if I keep playing it throughout the day, it's really good. So I'm loving it.
Oh,
But
thank you, Kristen.
Cheryl, thank you so much for being here. Where can readers go to connect with you and all of your books?
Well, you can go to my website, which is just cherylbostrom.com, CherylBostrom. And then I'm also on Substack, Cheryl Grey Bostrom, and I write a monthly blog and called Birds in the Hand, and I put a lot of my nature photography and writerly musings and puns. I love puns on there.
I
And then
love
I'm on
that.
I'm on all the socials under my name. And I'd love to connect with you. If you write to me, I'll always write back.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl, so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Good to talk.